by the time officials understood the damage was already complete. Men had been sealed away, voices reduced to echoes, routines narrowed to silence. What was meant to reform had begun to fracture minds instead. And the design that made it possible did not stay contained. It spread. The place was Eastern State Penitentiary, on the edge of Philadelphia. When it opened in the 19th century, it promised something no prison had ever delivered at scale: order without chains, obedience without whips, and moral transformation through architecture itself. Its reputation followed quickly. Visitors crossed oceans to see it. Legislators studied its blueprints. Wardens copied its rules. And before anyone could fully measure the consequences, the model had already been exported. What followed would reshape incarceration across continents, even as the original experiment began to unravel at home. Eastern State was built around an idea that seemed humane to reformers of its era. Isolation, carefully managed, would force reflection. Reflection would lead to repentance. Repentance would produce reform. The building enforced that theory. Cells radiated from a central hub. Walls blocked sight lines. Doors muffled sound. Every movement was controlled. Prisoners worked alone, ate alone, and slept alone. Even exercise happened in private yards attached to each cell. The design was not incidental. It was the system. At first, supporters pointed to calm corridors and the absence of open violence as proof it worked. Discipline appeared effortless. Guards did not need to shout. Prisoners did not congregate. From the outside, it looked like a triumph of enlightened punishment. But that wasn't the worst part. The first major cracks appeared not in statistics, but in observations. Physicians and inspectors began reporting symptoms they could not ignore. Prisoners displayed anxiety, confusion, and despair. Some spoke to themselves. Others refused to speak at all. A number deteriorated rapidly, despite entering healthy. The silence that kept order was also erasing people. Even so, the building's influence grew. Across the Atlantic, British reformers searching for a modern solution saw Eastern State as a blueprint. The result was Pentonville Prison, constructed in the 1840s. Its radial layout echoed Philadelphia's design. Its rules emphasized separation, silence, and surveillance. Pentonville was intended as a national model, and for a time it was. Dozens of prisons across Britain adopted its principles. Visitors again arrived in waves, this time to London, to witness a system that promised discipline through design. What few of those visitors saw was how quickly the same problems followed. Reports from Pentonville described mental collapse among inmates subjected to prolonged isolation. Some required removal to asylums. Others attempted self-harm. The British government quietly adjusted policies, reducing the length of strict separation. The architecture remained, but the ideology softened. The building could not be undone. Only the rules could bend. And still, the idea traveled. In Europe, variations appeared in France, the Netherlands, and parts of Germany. In the United States, the influence collided with a competing philosophy. In New York, prisons like Auburn Prison rejected full isolation in favor of congregate labor enforced by silence. This Auburn system promised economic productivity and control. For decades, the two models competed, debated by lawmakers and wardens. Isolation versus enforced silence. Reflection versus labor. Moral reform versus discipline. The debate sounded academic. The consequences were not. At Eastern State, administrators began quietly modifying practices as evidence mounted. Absolute isolation proved unsustainable. Some prisoners broke down. Others emerged unable to function socially. Outside observers took notice. By the late 19th century, enthusiasm waned. The prison did not close. It adapted. But the myth of perfect reform through isolation had already been sold. Here is the contradiction that few acknowledged at the time. Even as the original experiment faltered, its architectural logic had become embedded worldwide. Designers believed they could correct the mistakes without abandoning the form. Shorter isolation, better monitoring, improved ventilation. The building, they argued, was not the problem. History would keep testing that assumption. In the 20th century, new prisons revived old principles under new names. Segregation units, control blocks, solitary confinement wings. While conditions varied, the core idea remained familiar: isolate the individual to maintain order. Eastern State's legacy lived on not as a museum piece, but as a recurring solution whenever systems felt threatened by disorder. Few people outside ever learned how directly the lines connected. Scholars tracing modern prison layouts consistently return to Philadelphia. The radial design, central observation points, and emphasis on separation appear again and again. Even facilities that reject total isolation still rely on spatial control pioneered there. Movement schedules, restricted sightlines, architectural dominance over human behavior. At the same time, the moral promise that once justified the design had disappeared. Modern prisons rarely claim isolation reforms the soul. They claim it preserves safety. The rationale shifted. The structure remained. That shift matters. When Eastern State opened, reformers believed suffering could be measured and improved upon. Silence was medicine. Isolation was treatment. When the harm became undeniable, the language changed, but the building stayed. Architecture outlasted ideology. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe, because the next one goes even deeper. By the mid-20th century, Eastern State itself no longer symbolized progress. It was overcrowded. Its systems outdated. It closed in 1971, abandoned and deteriorating. Tourists now walk its corridors, reading plaques that describe both its ambition and its failures. The building is framed as a lesson learned. Yet the influence never truly left. International human rights organizations would later document the psychological effects of prolonged isolation across multiple countries. Their findings echoed the same patterns observed in the 19th century. Anxiety, depression, cognitive decline. The symptoms were consistent, regardless of era or location. The debate resurfaced, this time with scientific language rather than moral philosophy. What followed shocked even experienced observers. Despite the evidence, isolation remained embedded in modern corrections. Supermax prisons in the United States revived total separation on an unprecedented scale. Cells designed for one held men for decades. Movement was minimal. Human contact nearly non-existent. The technology was new. The logic was old. The lineage was clear to those who studied it. Eastern State did not invent punishment. It did not invent confinement. What it introduced was the belief that architecture could solve moral and administrative problems simultaneously. That belief proved seductive. It promised control without brutality, order without constant force. For governments facing crime, unrest, or political pressure, it offered certainty. And certainty spreads easily. Today, prison designers still reference principles born in Philadelphia, often without acknowledging their origin. The radial plan is efficient. Segregation simplifies management. Isolation reduces visible conflict. These are operational truths. What remains contested is the cost. The unresolved question lingers. Can a system built to suppress interaction ever produce rehabilitation? Or does it merely postpone harm, shifting it from public view to private collapse? Eastern State stands as both prototype and warning. Its walls did what they were built to do. They enforced silence. They imposed order. They also demonstrated the limits of control when applied to human minds. That contradiction is its true legacy. The global prison system did not copy Eastern State because it was cruel. It copied it because it appeared rational. Only later did the damage become impossible to ignore. By then, the architecture was everywhere. What remains is not a simple verdict, but a record. A record of how good intentions harden into concrete. how experiments become templates, and how designs outlive the beliefs that created them. Eastern State no longer holds prisoners. Its influence does. If this story kept you watching, the next one will stay with you even longer. Subscribe for more real prison documentaries.